In the midst of a scorched horizon, where the sky forever smoldered with a faint copper tinge, a solitary caravan of travelers pressed onward across barren flats that once had been vibrant farmland. No one remembered when the last real rainfall had come, only that the ground had cracked into a labyrinth of fissures that whispered of collapse. Local legends spoke of an ancient river, the Arashkai, which had flowed through the region in biblical proportions, blessing the surrounding lands with prosperity. But over decades, its waters dwindled to a mere trickle, and now the Arashkai was wholly gone, revealing a dusty river littered with the remnants of vanished dynasties. In the unforgiving heat, the travelers blinked against the swirling dust, stirring up ghost-like shapes around them. Rumors had spread of unsettling artifacts emerging where water once ran deep, and these wanderers, a ragtag group of archaeologists, spiritual seekers, and exiles fleeing the escalating conflicts to the south, believed they might find answers hidden beneath the pale silt. Among them walked Ishmael, a weathered researcher who had dedicated his life to studying forbidden texts that told of cataclysmic endings. Ever since he was a child, nightmares of towering figures and ancient prisons haunted him. His grandmother had once whispered stories of watchers from the sky, of golden altars and sealed corridors that anchored supernatural entities. Now, trudging along the lost river's edge, he could not shake the feeling that these nightmares were about to converge with reality. Along the wide channel of the dried Arashkai, basalt shards jutted like broken teeth in a monstrous jaw. Occasionally, someone would spot a glimmer in the dust, perhaps a stray coin from a forgotten empire, or a strange chunk of obsidian etched with an unreadable script. The deeper they ventured, the more frequent these discoveries became. Twisted metal implements, fragments of a black stone that defied classification, lumps of tarnished material that might once have been gold. A hush followed whenever they uncovered anything unusual, for each new relic seemed like a key to a lost dimension. Some spoke of a direct link to the days of primeval kings who worshipped powers not of this world. Ishan, a local guide hired in the nearest city, told them all how the old men of his village whispered of a hidden fortress beneath the Arashkai's bed. Supposedly, it had been built by an empire that worshipped flaming spirits. According to legend, these spirits once moved freely between the heavens and the mortal realm, bestowing knowledge of warfare, alchemy, and sorcery. But their gifts brought ruin, and the Almighty had them chained under the ground, sealing them behind gates of unimaginable craftsmanship. The group dismissed the talk as fable, until they began to glimpse the edges of unnatural structures protruding from the dry channel. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with a sinister red glow, they reached a section of river where great stone blocks lay arranged in a pattern. The blocks formed a partial wall, half buried in silt, an intricate mosaic of glyphs carved upon their faces. Ivy, an epigraphist with a background in comparative religions, knelt to study these carvings. She ran her fingers gently over the symbols, noting the uncanny similarity to cuneiform, but twisted, somehow, as though belonging to a language that predated all recognized scripts. Her voice shook when she said she recognized references to watchers and a sunless gate, the very things Ishmael's grandmother had spoken of. Pressing on, they uncovered a set of steps leading downward, spiraling into what felt like a buried sanctuary. A faint odor like sulfur clung to the air, and an unsettling vibration coursed through the stones beneath their feet. Light flickered oddly off the walls, as though something below was emitting pulses of energy. With each step, their ears filled with distant hums that resembled chanting, though no living soul seemed to be there. Deeper inside, they found a corridor lined with tall pillars carved in the shapes of monstrous beings. Winged silhouettes, elongated limbs, eyes that seemed to follow them in the torchlight. Some pillars were partially collapsed, revealing hidden alcoves behind them. In one such alcove, they discovered a pedestal of black metal that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. Upon it lay what looked like fragments of a large chain, heavy iron rings fused in places with a coppery alloy. The chain's surface was etched with swirling patterns reminiscent of serpents devouring their own tails. Ishmael felt a pang in his chest, recalling accounts in obscure texts that spoke of a binding mechanism forced upon rebellious entities that once threatened the order of creation. The group's breath caught when they realized the chain extended into the darkness, anchored somewhere deeper in the subterranean vault. Testing its weight, they found it impossible to move more than an inch, as though it were pinned by an immense force. Their unease only grew. If this chain was to hold something, what might it have imprisoned? A hush settled over them as they pressed onward, guided by a faint luminescence emanating from an unseen chamber. The corridor opened into a vast underground hall, the ceiling supported by thick columns carved to resemble robed guardians. In the center of the hall lay a circular depression, perhaps a ritual pit or altar site. And there, half submerged in the dust, was an enormous skeleton. By the size of its vertebrae, it might have been some titanic serpent, though no ordinary snake could measure this length or girth. The skull alone was as large as a grown man's torso, with dagger-like fangs that gleamed faintly in the dancing torchlight. Ishan murmured a prayer. Others stepped back in alarm. Yet Ivy moved closer, astonished by how well the bones were preserved. A swirl of superstitious dread coiled in her gut. Ishmael remembered the stories of primeval dragons or monstrous serpents that the rebellious watchers were said to spawn in their bid to twist creation. Was this skeleton one of those abominations? He touched a scaly fragment near the base of a rib, feeling an inexplicable warmth pulsate. The entire carcass felt like a warning from antiquity, a leftover from battles that shaped the dawn of civilization. At that moment, an otherworldly resonance pulsed through the chamber. It sounded like a deep chord struck on a colossal organ, reverberating along the walls. The chain clinked and shifted ever so slightly, making everyone freeze. Then silence. Yaretsi, one of the spiritual seekers, fell to her knees and began reciting verses about watchers cast down from heaven, about monstrous creations drowned in the great deluge. She believed they had stumbled upon the boundary between mortal life and the place where old transgressors had been locked away. Her words hung in the thick air as the group realized with dawning dread that they might be treading on the threshold of something beyond rational explanation. She told them of an obscure prophecy, that one day, when the Earth's dryness exposed the secret halls, mankind would confront the remnants of a dark alliance forged at the dawn of time. The question was, had they arrived too late, or perhaps too soon? Deeper into the hall, the chain slithered across the floor, leading to a sealed gate. The gate was crafted of polished basalt inlaid with silver lines that formed a swirling script. Though the silver had blackened with age, it retained an aura of solemn power. No visible lock could be seen, only a central disc carved with an emblem shaped like an upside-down crown. All attempts to push or pry the gate yielded no success. It stood immovable, as though it were fused to the earth itself. Ishan insisted they leave, that they had no business awakening what was meant to remain asleep. Yet, an almost supernatural pull urged the others on. Their entire journey had led them here. The dryness of the Arashkai, and the countless omens in the world, wars in the north, bizarre storms in the west, unexplained lights in the night sky. Everything pointed to a moment of revelation. The group set up a makeshift camp in the chamber, determined to study the gate. In hushed tones, they shared rumors that floods had struck faraway lands accompanied by sightings of towering silhouettes, that fresh earthquakes had shattered once stable coastlines, that blood-red halos had ringed the moon. To many, these phenomena were signs of cosmic forces stirring. Each time a gust of wind howled across the empty river above, a hollow echo filtered down, as if the earth itself were breathing. Over the following nights, fragments of nightmares gripped each traveler. Ivy dreamed of robed figures chanting in an unknown tongue, forging the chain in a roaring furnace while winged creatures howled in defiance. Ishan dreamed he was a child lost in an infinite labyrinth of broken pillars, hearing a slow, metallic scraping that followed him relentlessly. Ishmael's nightmares returned, worse than ever. Glimpses of monstrous shapes straining against bonds that glowed white-hot, and an echoing voice proclaiming that once the waters dried, the last seal would crack. Each morning, they awakened to more disquieting evidence of movement deeper beneath the stone. A new crack in the floor, slight shifts in the chain's position, unexplained footprints in the dust. Something seemed to stir on the other side of the sealed gate, as though their presence had roused an ancient awareness. Tension consumed them. Some wanted to leave immediately and never look back. Others insisted they had come too far to abandon these revelations. The chain, the serpent bones, the gate's unearthly design, all of it must be documented and understood. Yet every hour spent in that subterranean realm chipped away at their composure. Late on the fourth evening, Yoretsi discovered a hidden recess in one of the corners, blocked by rubble. Clearing away stones, she found a small chamber containing a narrow table upon which rested a battered codex. Its pages were made from an unknown parchment, though they felt leathery and smelled faintly of resin. The script inside curled in elaborate forms, reminiscent of ancient tongues, but laced with symbols that glowed faintly. She beckoned Ivy and Ishmael, who pored over the codex by lamplight. Certain lines resembled archaic references to Watchers, to a binding rite, and to a final age of unveiling. Sketched images depicted chain links inscribed with sigils, just like the ones outside. They gasped upon seeing a depiction of the gate, the same swirling design, with 4 monstrous shapes drawn behind it, each wreathed in some cosmic flame. A final entry described an invocation, a lamentation, really, written by priests who feared that one day these Watchers or fallen powers might break free. To hold them required unwavering vigilance and obedience to a higher divine command. If that vigilance failed, the gate would yield, allowing chaos to spill forth. Was the dryness of the Arashkai a sign that the Watchers' captivity was nearing its end? The group decided to hold a vigil, reciting fragments from the Codex in an attempt to reinforce the ancient seal. They formed a circle around the gate, pressing hands to the basalt, chanting words half understood. As they chanted, the chain glimmered along its length, pulsing as though heated from within. The ground quivered, and an agonized groan echoed through the hidden vault. Some of the travelers collapsed, overcome by waves of dread. For an instant, it felt like the gate was about to crack open. Then, just as quickly, the vibrations ceased. An ominous hush descended. A surge of relief and terror swept the group. They might have delayed whatever was stirring, or perhaps only provoked it further. In the following hours, the dust-laden air seemed more manageable. The gloom receded a fraction. But no one dared celebrate. They simply gathered their belongings in tense silence, preparing to ascend from that dark domain. They left the gate behind, sealed, for now, by an ancient power whose strength they could only guess. Emerging onto the exposed river beneath a dawn sky, they found the wind had changed direction, carrying the fresh smell of rain. Clouds gathered on the horizon, thick and heavy with a promise of moisture. In the distance, lightning flared, as if nature itself was reacting to their trespass. The travelers parted ways soon afterward, each carrying the haunting knowledge that the gate and its monstrous chain remained below, safeguarding or restraining something beyond comprehension. Ishmael clutched the battered codex, determined to translate every line before the next signs from the heavens arrived. And so they dispersed into a world that felt precariously poised between the memory of a once-flowing river and the ominous truths they had uncovered below it. Whispers spread in nearby towns, then further, of explorers who had ventured into a lost underworld. Some ridiculed the stories as tall tales, yet those who heard the accounts of the chain, the serpent bones, and the basalt gate discovered a shiver they could not dismiss. Wars raged in distant provinces, pestilence flared in overcrowded camps, strange weather patterns threatened harvests. More than ever, people felt an impending shift, a cosmic tension. Some prayed for deliverance, others turned to cynicism or despair. But in hidden enclaves, small circles of believers quietly studied warnings about watchers and sealed gates, about the dryness that heralded a potential resurgence of a primeval rebellion. They recalled that prophecy, which had always taught that once the great boundary waters receded, the final confrontation would loom. From deserted monasteries to clandestine gatherings in modern cities, individuals shared the same question. Could this newly revealed chain be the ancient restraint for powers we cannot face? And if those watchers truly stirred again, was humanity prepared? Far across the dried river plain, a lone figure stood at twilight before the cracked channel where the Arashkai once glimmered. Cloaked and hooded, the figure gazed upon the caked mud, as though sensing some faint heartbeat in the depths. The air sparked with static. A low, inaudible hum rippled beneath the surface. The figure clenched a staff decorated with glyphs, matching those carved into the basalt gate. Slowly, a whisper passed through the wind, words too old to be recognized, echoing the final lines of the codex. The figure turned and vanished into the gloom, leaving behind a single footprint in the dust that shimmered for an instant before fading. In that solemn hush, the wind died and a hush of possibility prevailed, as though the world hung on the brink of a moment too vast to fathom. Those few who had seen the chain and read the writings felt it in their bones. A threshold stood at the heart of the dried river, sealed by ancient hands, awaiting the final verdict of history. Even if the rains came back and the Arashkai flowed once more, the memory of what lay below would remain a silent reckoning. For the day was approaching when all hidden things would be laid bare, and the last watchers, imprisoned since the dawn of time, would either break free or face a decisive judgment. Until then, each drop of water returning to the land seemed an uncertain reprieve, a fragile thread of hope woven against the inevitability of a cosmic clock counting down. The dryness had revealed the chain and the gate, and no mortal alive could forget what they had witnessed in that subterranean domain. So the travelers moved on, uneasy guardians of a truth that defied rational thought. The world carried on with its battles and ambitions, mostly ignorant of the cryptic realm beneath the dried riverbed. Yet in the quiet spaces between thunderclaps, in the hush before new rains, one could almost hear the faint echo of those living stones, resonating with a promise of confrontation yet to come. A testament that the boundary between mortal life and unimaginable forces stood precariously thin, sealed only by an ancient chain and the lingering mercy of a power far beyond human grasp. Nightfall crept over the dusty horizon, painting the cracked river in eerie shades of violet and charcoal. The travelers had dispersed into distant towns, yet the memories they carried from beneath the dried Arashkai did not fade. Even apart, they sensed a common pulse tying them back to that subterranean hall and its silent gate. In cramped inns and makeshift shelters, they scribbled notes by flickering candlelight, trying to decipher the final, half-faded words in the codex that had hinted at a ritual of sealing and vigil. None of them could forget the sensation of that ancient chain quivering under their hands like a living thing. Meanwhile, rumors spread of a newfound dampness in the air. Far upstream, dark clouds churned ominously, suggesting that rain might return to the parched land. Yet what should have been a simple sign of hope instead made many uneasy. Would the rising waters simply conceal the gate again, or had they awakened something beneath the river that no flood could hide? Ishmael found himself in a bustling caravanserai, eyes sunken with exhaustion. He was poring over translations of the Archaic glyphs, comparing them to references in brittle manuscripts he had borrowed from a local temple library. By lamplight, he caught a fleeting mention of four bound shadows in a prophecy from centuries past, entities tied to cosmic upheaval, forced into dormancy until the final thirst of the land. His heart pounded as he recalled the swirling script etched into the chain links. Ivy, now stationed in a half-ruined fortress overlooking what remained of the Arashkai, spent her days mapping the underground structures the group had glimpsed. She suspected the sublevels extended further than they had believed. Local herdsmen confirmed that sinkholes kept forming in the deeper sections of the dry channel, as though the ground below were hollowing out. Each new collapse hinted at additional sealed passages or chambers yet to be revealed. Ishan tried to distance himself from all of it, returning to his village. But troubled sleep soon drove him from his home. Each time he shut his eyes, he heard the chain's metallic rattle echo through dream corridors. Determined to find peace, he packed a few belongings and set out to rejoin Ivy, hoping knowledge might calm the nightmares. Then, one restless evening, a dense mist wove its way along the vacant river. At the very site where they had first descended into the hidden hall, an unearthly glow flickered beneath the surface. Locals who happened to be nearby reported hearing a tremor that rattled stones and toppled a centuries-old statue. The glow subsided by dawn, leaving only fresh cracks in the dry ground that led straight toward the basalt gate. Word spread fast. Ishmael and Ivy independently resolved to hurry back, while Ishan, guided by recurring dreams, traveled without pause. They reached the site at dusk, joined by Yaretsi, her eyes shadowed with foreboding. The surface looked unchanged except for the thin fractures streaking outward like spider veins. No one spoke as they descended. Their torches flickered in stale air, the faint smell of sulfur more potent than ever. In the vast hall, a jarring scene awaited them. The serpent's skeleton had shifted, and a section of ribs was missing, as though removed or dislodged. Worse still, the chain had moved several feet, dragging across the floor to reveal a portion of that sealed gate's lower half. Its carved surface was marred with jagged new fissures. The throbbing hum filled the chamber, rising and falling like a monstrous heartbeat. Ivy felt the vibration rattling her bones. Yaretsi instinctively stepped forward, reciting fragments from the codex, her voice tight with urgency. The glyphs on the chain sparked in faint pulses, responding to her words. For a single breath, the gate seemed to lurch, exhaling a gust of wind that carried an ancient, almost despairing groan. Then all fell silent. In that hush, they heard a distant scraping, like metal on stone, echoing from somewhere far behind the barrier. Ishan's knuckles whitened on the torch handle. Ishmael swallowed hard. What if they had come too late, and the watchers no longer slept? Something stirred behind the basalt slab, perhaps not yet free, but no longer in deep slumber. Ivy tried to read further, unrolling a page from the codex. By the wavering torchlight, she identified what might be a ritual diagram describing wards that had once been installed near the chain. "We have to replace them," she said, barely above a whisper. "Whatever bound these things, it's failing." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. Ominous clouds gathered. Rain might soon drench the parched landscape. If it came, water would flood these passages, making any further attempts to reinforce or understand the seal nearly impossible. They exchanged glances loaded with dread and determination. Each had been changed by the knowledge of what dwelt here. The chain was not merely an artifact. It was the last line between mortal life and a darkness yearning to break free. While the world above remained unaware, locked in its own strife, time was running out. Glancing at the fissured gate, they realized that any illusions of safety were gone. The Drinnis had revealed a truth mankind was never meant to discover. All they could do was try, in the short hours remaining, to shore up the ancient wards or face a reckoning that transcended human wars and political chaos. Together they lit more torches, spread out their tools, and opened the codex to its cryptic instructions. The hush of the cavern pressed in on them. With each heartbeat, that deep hum seemed to grow, and in the far corner, the chain twitched with a silent, menacing life of its own. The watchers, it seemed, were no longer content to remain hushed. Whatever was sealed behind basalt and myth was awakening, and unless the travelers could restore the ancient bonds, the next rumble of thunder might be overshadowed by something far more terrible rising to greet the storm. Torches hissing in the stale underground air, they worked with frantic precision, every whispered instruction echoing off the soaring columns of that buried hall. Ivy laid out a ring of chalky lines around the chain, scrawling half-familiar glyphs between circles of dried pigment. Ishan's hand shook as he steadied her flashlight, eyes darting to the basalt gate where the faint scraping sound had intensified. Nearby, Ishmael consulted the codex, flipping pages with his free hand while pressing an ear to the cold stone floor, hoping to gauge whatever was clawing or shifting on the other side. Yaretsi stood watch, palms clammy around a copper bowl brimming with a pungent mixture of myrrh and crushed mineral salts. The codex's instructions demanded a burning of Earth's essences, likely an echo of those ancient priests' final measures to reinforce divine restraints. Overhead, the storm clouds gathered, thunder rolling through layers of rock, each distant crash vibrating the chain. With every tremor, the floor seemed to sigh, and the skeleton of the monstrous serpent rattled in the shadows, as if reliving some primordial agony. Suddenly, a soft rumble grew behind the gate, accompanied by a flash of unearthly light that seeped through the fissures. An oppressive heat gusted against their faces. It felt alive, as though the watchers beyond were pushing energy through any crack in the barrier. The chain trembled once more, emitting a groan that echoed across the pillars. Ivy glanced at Ishmael with terror in her eyes. She could practically feel the watcher's restless will, a tidal force straining to break free. Lighted, Ishmael muttered, voice low and urgent, and Yaretsi brought a small torch to the copper bowl's edge. Flames caught with a sputter, devouring the mixture in a swirling column of smoke. A harsh, bitter scent filled the hall, stinging their nostrils and tearing at their eyes. The codex called it a purifying haze, a last attempt to reassert the old wards. At once, the chain's etched symbols flared to life, faint pulses traveling its length like lightning locked in metal. Ishan swallowed hard. "It's working," he breathed, though his gaze remained fixed on the gate. The heat from behind it surged again. Cracks in the basalt yawned wider, a glimmering swirl of violet light bleeding out. Wind whipped the smoke around the circle of glyphs, forming twisting shapes that clashed with the flickers of unearthly brilliance. Everyone braced, hearts pounding. The watchers, whatever form they took, seemed close to breaching their prison. Then the floor bucked, almost throwing them off their feet. Dust rained from the vaulted ceiling as a thunderous crash resonated outside. It had begun to pour, rain hammering the parched land above. The water found fissures, trickling downward in rivulets that fell through cracks in the hall roof. Droplets sizzled where they landed on the basalt gate's hot surface, steam hissing into the swirling cloud of myrrh smoke. Slowly, the chain quivered, resisting an unseen pull, fighting to hold its anchor. Gritting her teeth, Ivy traced the final set of glyphs with trembling chalk, completing the circle. Yaretsi chanted lines from the codex, voice pitched high, nearly drowned by the roaring wind overhead. Light flared across the metal links. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The oppressive force behind the gate halted, the raking noises ceased, and the watcher's presence felt muted, almost drowsy. The entire hall seemed to inhale. Then that strange light behind the fissures flickered, drawing back as though thwarted. One by one, the cracks sealed over with a thin crust of darkness, and the violet glow retreated. Ishmael gasped, hardly daring to believe they had succeeded. Outside, the deluge roared. Streams of muddy water began spilling down the ancient steps. The chain's glow faded to a faint ember, stable but exhausted, as though it had spent centuries of energy in mere moments. For now, the watchers remained sealed. The group exhaled in unison, relief mixed with dread. The gate still bore scars, the skeleton still lay in monstrous repose, and the chain might not endure a second onslaught. They had bought time, nothing more. Ishan sloshed through rising puddles to peer at the gate one last time, but the basalt threshold stood silent, no longer leaking cosmic heat. Outside, the storm raged, gradually submerging the newly redrawn wards. Time was short. If the river filled again, this place would vanish beneath swirling currents, which would be safer for the world. Bury it underwater once more, or keep it accessible for future guardians to maintain the seal. They had no answer. Weary yet resolute, They gathered their remaining supplies, preparing to ascend before the chamber flooded. Yaretsi gently placed the copper bowl on a ledge as an offering, ashes still smoldering from the ritual. Unspoken understanding passed among them. They would not speak openly of the Watchers, the chain, or the serpent's bones. Few would believe them, and fewer still could act without endangering everything. As they climbed, thunder rumbled a bass note that shook the walls. Rainwater streamed down the ramp, threatening to wash away every trace of their circle. Gasping for breath, they emerged at last onto the dark, storm-lashed riverbed. Lightning stitched across the sky, illuminating the horizon in flashes of brilliant white. Water was beginning to pool amid the cracked earth, forging rivulets that soon would become a torrent. The gate below would be submerged, returning to its secret, yet none of them felt triumph. Something vast and incomprehensible lingered in that underground realm, stirring in defiance of mortal wards. Ishmael wondered if another generation would someday discover these halls anew, possibly too late to prevent the Watcher's release. Lightning flickered again, revealing silhouettes in the distance, others approaching, or perhaps illusions cast by the rain-soaked air. The travelers exchanged grim nods and set out across the reawakening Arashkai, hearts hammering with the knowledge that ancient captivity was never truly guaranteed. They had patched the chain's power this night, but the world's thirst had awakened old horrors. In a single flash, the sky lit blood red, and they pressed on through the flood, carrying secrets that no storm could ever truly wash away. Even as the storm raged through the night, the rains came with a terrible vigor, filling the cracked Arashkai River faster than any could have imagined. By dawn, gray torrents had swallowed the exposed corridors and half-buried halls where the monstrous chain lay. Muddy currents tumbled over the surface, washing away footprints, chalk glyphs, and every sign of the traveler's vigil. High on a rocky bluff overlooking the reflooded channel, Ishmael, Ivy, Ishan, and Yaretsi gathered under a makeshift awning of stitched tarps, their clothes still sodden from the evening's ordeal. The roaring water below them seemed almost too loud, a relentless reminder of how quickly the land had shifted overnight. Ishan watched the swirling dark river with a haunted expression. "It's gone now," he whispered, though not with relief. "No trace of the gate or that chain." Ivy nodded, her eyes unfocused. The end of her makeshift rope belt still bore smudges of chalk from the wards. "Buried under who knows how many feet of water," she said. "I can't decide if that's for the best or not." Ishmael clutched the codex in both arms as though it were his only talisman. The battered pages still smelled of burnt resin and the strange metallic tang from below. At least the Watchers didn't break free. We won this time. But the binding. He hesitated, remembering the gate's widening cracks. "I'm not sure how long it will hold." Rain drummed against the tarp. Yaretsi sat by a small portable stove, heating a tin cup of tea. Her eyes were distant, as if she were listening to voices in a hidden place. "I keep thinking, maybe water alone can't fix whatever's stirring down there. The old priests built their rituals to last centuries, but it was also said the Watchers could pry open reality if humanity's faith collapsed." She paused, stirring the tea. "And faith is collapsing everywhere. War, famine, fear. These things erode hope." A hush followed her words. They felt it too, the tension roiling across the region, the growing unrest in distant cities, the whispers of new conflicts beyond the horizon. The Watcher's imprisonment might yet depend on an unspoken cosmic balance, one that was tipping in uncertain directions. By mid-morning, the storm showed no sign of letting up. A merchant caravan passed, its camels slogging through the mud, while armed escorts looked nervously at the rising waters. The travelers exchanged polite nods, none the wiser about what truly lay beneath the torrent. In some ways, the group envied that ignorance. Ishan caught the merchant captain's eye and raised a hand in greeting, but got no response other than a hurried glance. Fear hung thick in the air, and mistrust was high. "We should move," Ivy said quietly. before the roads are fully impassable. Ishmael slipped the codex into a waterproof satchel. I need to get these texts somewhere safe. The archives in Jakar might have cross-references. We have to understand more about that chain's forging, maybe re-etch the wards if. His voice trailed off. None of them wanted to say it out loud. If the Watchers stir again, or if the chain fails completely. Gathering their scant supplies, they clambered onto a narrow path that wound along the bluff. The ground was slick with red-brown muck, forcing them to proceed slowly. Behind them, the swollen river concealed all secrets. When the rain finally eased to a drizzle, the clouds remained steel gray overhead. By early afternoon, the group reached a crossroads. One track led east toward the known trade routes, where they might find caravans heading to Jakar. Another lane sloped south, rumored to be patrolled by lawless militias capitalizing on the region's chaos. A third direction forked north, ascending toward rugged hills and rumored ruins. We should choose the way east, Ivy suggested, so we can keep the codex safe and research further. Yaretsi frowned, glancing north. Something pulls me that way. I can't explain it. Like the codex wants to trace its origins. Ishan eyed the sky. North is dangerous terrain. But if there's a chance we'll find older inscriptions, maybe the place where they first chained the Watchers. Ivy couldn't sleep, her skin prickling with foreboding. She pictured Watchers lurking in the darkness, unraveling cosmic restraints, while humankind bickered over trivial power struggles. Come morning, they found deep claw marks raked across one of the juniper trunks. Evidence they could not explain. No footprints accompanied them, nor any sign of a creature's approach. They broke camp hastily, pressing onward with new urgency. Tension weighed on them all. The Watchers might remain sealed under the watery Arashkai, but malevolent forces could still be at work, straining unseen bonds elsewhere. Another 2 days passed in a slow, grim march. Occasional travelers or refugees told stories of unknown predators killing livestock in the night. Some claimed to see robed figures chanting in ruined churches, yet no one had concrete proof. Fear saturated the land like a haze. On the 5th day since leaving the re-flooded riverbed, they crested a ridge that revealed a wide valley, dotted with distant clusters of buildings. According to a weathered signpost, the city of Kassel lay just beyond the valley, a known hub of trade and scholarship. There, they might find a caravan heading to Jakar, or at least discover scribes to help decode the last fragments of the codex. With heavy feet but a flicker of hope, they trudged downhill. As sunset stained the sky in bronze and crimson, the walls of Kassel came into view, mud brick ramparts around an urban sprawl. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and the faint glimmer of lamplight promised shelter. Yet the travelers' relief was tempered by caution. Conflict and suspicion pervaded every settlement these days. Could Kassel offer them allies for their mission, or would it harbor new threats? Silently, they filed across a narrow bridge spanning a shallow ravine outside the city gate. Guards stood watch, scanning the newcomers with hostile eyes. Once inside, the group found a labyrinth of winding alleys and markets beneath swaying lanterns. Everything smelled of spiced meats, sweat, and damp straw. Barkers shouted over each other to sell goods. Passers-by hurried by, anxious, as though the normal hustle concealed widespread unease. Ivy's shoulders tensed under the weight of scrutiny. Ishan stepped forward to bargain for lodging at a cramped guesthouse near the main bazaar. The elderly proprietor eyed them skeptically but accepted their coin. Safely behind a bolted door, the four sank onto thin cushions, exhausted. Ishmael placed the codex carefully on a low table. We can ask around tomorrow. Find a scribe with knowledge of Archic scripts. Maybe put out discreet inquiries about any local monasteries. Ivy brushed damp hair from her face. We'll need to be careful. If word spreads that we possess a relic tied to dangerous knowledge, she sighed, recalling the Watchers. It could spark panic. Yaretsi nodded, glancing at a roach scuttling across the floor. We keep our circle small. The Watchers' name alone might draw cults or enemies hoping to use their power. Ishan let out a slow breath. So we slip into the city's underbelly of scholars and see what emerges. But the clock is ticking. We all sense it. Indeed, a subtle drumbeat of urgency pounded in their chests. As though time itself bled away with each day, the watchers remained trapped yet stirring. Night came swiftly, the city sounds drifting up through cracks in the shutters. Drunken voices, rolling carts, the distant clang of blacksmiths. Sleep was restless, plagued by half-dreams of basalt doors and glowing serpents. At dawn, they set off in separate directions through Kaisel's winding streets, each determined to glean what they could about ancient bindings, rumored lost texts, and any mention of watchers bound by cosmic chains. Yet beneath their determined search lurked a haunting reality. Though the Arashkai's waters had reclaimed the gate, the watchers within might have found new cracks in the fabric of this troubled world. And each day that passed without a full restoration of those wards could bring the watchers closer to the moment of unimaginable release.